The neighborhood had always been my pride and joy. When I bought the house 3 years ago, I thought I had finally made it. A beautiful property with a wide backyard, a neat little pool, and the kind of quiet suburban peace that people pay good money for. Everything about it felt perfect. The maple-lined streets, the uniform mailboxes, the soft hum of sprinklers in the early morning. It was the kind of place where people waved while mowing their lawns and brought over pies to welcome new residents. Or at least, that's what I thought when I moved in. It didn't take long before I realized that perfection had its cracks. And those cracks came with blonde highlights, oversized sunglasses, and a clipboard full of self-importance. Karen lived 3 houses down. Everyone knew her, mostly because she made sure of it. She was the self-appointed enforcer of the HOA rules, even though she wasn't officially on the board. She had a way of inserting herself into every issue, whether it was about paint colors, lawn length, or where someone parked their car overnight. At first, I didn't mind her much. I had seen her type before. The suburban gatekeeper, obsessed with control, but harmless enough if ignored. That was until the pool incident started. It began small. One Saturday afternoon, I was sitting inside, enjoying the faint hum of the air conditioner, when I heard splashing. At first, I thought it was just kids playing next door. But when I looked through the blinds, I saw 2 unfamiliar children jumping into my pool, and a woman lounging on one of my chairs, sipping a drink like she owned the place. It was Karen. At first, I thought maybe there had been some kind of misunderstanding. The HOA sometimes organized small gatherings, and maybe, just maybe, she thought this was one of those. But the more I watched, the more obvious it became. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had come in through the unlocked gate on the side, the one I sometimes forgot to latch. Her kids had brought their floaties, snacks, and towels. She'd even laid out sunscreen on my patio table. I didn't go out to confront her that day. I just watched, stunned, as they spent nearly 2 hours in my pool, then left without so much as a thank you. The next morning, I found wet footprints on my deck and an empty juice box near my pool filter. I told myself it wouldn't happen again. I locked the gate and figured that would be the end of it. But a few days later, when I got home from work early, I heard laughter again. That same shrill, carefree sound that had no business echoing through my backyard. Karen was there again, this time with her husband and another couple. They had dragged in a small cooler, blasting music from a Bluetooth speaker. My deck chairs had been rearranged, one of my towels was being used as a picnic mat, and someone had spilled something sticky near the pool's edge. It wasn't just trespassing, it was entitlement. That night, I checked my security cameras and saw that she had been there multiple times over the past 2 weeks. Not once or twice, but 5 separate visits. Each time, she let herself in like it was her personal resort. I even saw her taking selfies with her sunglasses on, the pool glittering behind her, like some Instagram-perfect summer day. It made my blood boil. But I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I went to the HOA, thinking surely someone would do something. But when I brought it up, they just smiled politely and told me it wasn't really within their jurisdiction. Apparently, the HOA had no rules about pool sharing, and since the gate was sometimes unlocked, they suggested it might be a misunderstanding between neighbors. A misunderstanding. That's what they called it. After that, things got worse. Karen must have realized I hadn't said anything because her visits became more frequent and bolder. On weekends, her family would show up with pool noodles, towels, snacks, and music. On weekdays, I'd come home to find wet patches on the pavement and my pool furniture moved around. Once, I even found one of her kids' swim goggles floating in the deep end. Another time, someone had left a sticky popsicle wrapper wedged under the patio umbrella base. The worst part? The sheer arrogance. She'd wave at me when we passed each other on the street, smiling like nothing was wrong. Sometimes she'd even make comments like, "You've got such a great setup back there." It's so nice that neighbors can enjoy it too. It was infuriating. The way she twisted it, as if she was doing me a favor by using my pool, as if it were some kind of community asset, rather than something I worked hard to maintain. I tried talking to a few neighbors, hoping for some support. Most of them sympathized, but were careful not to get involved. "You know how Karen is," they'd say, with that tone that meant they'd given up long ago. She had a reputation for making life difficult for anyone who crossed her. Petty complaints, anonymous letters to the HOA, reports about unsightly trash bins or non-compliant holiday decorations. People didn't want to be her next target, so it was up to me. For a while, I tried smaller deterrents. I kept the gate locked. I put up a private property sign. I even installed a motion light by the side entrance. But she was relentless. The next time I checked the footage, I saw her husband climb over the fence while she handed their kids over one by one. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just inconsiderate. It was deliberate disrespect. I thought about calling the police, but it felt messy. This was a quiet, rule-bound neighborhood where everyone prided themselves on handling things civilly. The idea of involving law enforcement felt excessive, and I knew she'd weaponize it against me, turning herself into the victim. No, I needed a different plan. Something that would make her stop coming on her own. Something that wouldn't technically get me in trouble, but would send a clear message. That's when I started researching. Late at night, after scrolling through videos and forums about deterring unwanted pool guests, I came across an idea. Something subtle, harmless, but very effective. A few posts mentioned a type of pool additive, a fine, colorless powder that could make the water react in a very specific way when certain conditions were met. It wasn't dangerous, but it was embarrassing, the kind of thing that could end a trespasser's habit for good. The next morning, I drove to a specialty pool supply store one town over. The clerk didn't ask many questions, just rang up the small container of powder and told me to mix it in at night for best results. When I got home, I stood by the water's edge for a long time, watching my reflection ripple across the blue surface. The neighborhood was silent, the kind of quiet that came before a storm. I unscrewed the lid, tipped the powder in, and watched as it vanished beneath the surface, leaving no trace. Then I locked the gate and went inside, waiting. I didn't know it then, but the next weekend would change everything. The weekend arrived with the same routine rhythm as always. The faint whine of lawnmowers, the smell of fresh-cut grass, the hum of sprinklers, and the lazy hum of cicadas droning through the afternoon air. But for me, everything felt sharpened. Every sound, every shift of wind carried a pulse of expectation. I'd sprinkled the powder 2 nights before, just as the store clerk had instructed. The water had looked completely normal afterward, maybe even clearer than usual. It didn't foam, didn't smell strange, didn't shimmer in any suspicious way. To anyone else, it was just a pristine pool under a cloudless sky. But I knew better. I knew what was waiting beneath that glassy surface. I didn't have to wait long. By mid-afternoon on Saturday, the inevitable sound of laughter drifted through the air again. High-pitched, carefree, unbothered. That familiar sting of irritation flared through me as I peered through the blinds, confirming what I already knew. Karen was back. This time, she'd brought more people. 2 other families, all gathered around my pool like it was some kind of neighborhood party. Beach towels lined the deck, plastic cups balanced on the ledge, and a portable speaker thumped faintly from one of my patio chairs. It was unbelievable. I stayed inside, quiet and unseen, watching as they splashed and floated, completely oblivious. The water looked perfectly normal under the sun, sparkling like it always did. Karen was lounging in her oversized sun hat, her phone angled toward her face as she posed with the pool behind her. That's when I saw it. The faintest flicker of change in the water. At first, I thought it was just the light shifting through the clouds. But then it deepened. The water around the swimmers began to glow faintly, a strange pale tint that spread in rippling waves. Within seconds, it turned unmistakable. A bright, unmistakable neon blue blooming around every person in the pool. It was working. I hadn't been sure it would. After all, the whole concept seemed like something out of an urban legend. But here it was, playing out before my eyes. The powder wasn't toxic, wasn't harmful. It was simply a chemical that reacted to certain organic compounds, specifically the ones found in urine. Yes, the pool had become a giant tattletale. The kids noticed first. One of them froze mid-splash, staring at the glowing halo spreading around them. Then another. Within seconds, chaos erupted. Screams, gasps, confusion. Karen jumped to her feet, her sun hat tilting sideways as the kids scrambled out of the pool. I stood behind the curtain, heart pounding with a strange cocktail of satisfaction and disbelief. I hadn't expected it to work this well. Karen was yelling now. Not words I could make out, but sharp, indignant sounds carried by the wind. Her husband was staring into the water, gesturing wildly. The blue glow was fading slowly, but not before staining everyone's legs and swimwear with a faint turquoise tint that clung even as they toweled off. Within minutes, the pool party had dissolved into confusion and panic. Towels were grabbed hastily, coolers abandoned, and one by one, they hurried toward the gate. Karen was last to leave, clutching her phone, red-faced and sputtering. She cast one furious look toward the house before slamming the gate shut behind her, and just like that, silence returned. I stayed still for a long while, just listening. The faint buzz of the filter hummed through the quiet air, mingling with the faint scent of chlorine. I should have felt guilty, but I didn't. Not even a little. The sight of her expression, that moment of shock and humiliation, was more satisfying than I could have imagined. Still, I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to let something go quietly. She'd been embarrassed, publicly, and in front of her little entourage. There was no chance she'd just shrug it off. The next morning, I found proof of that. A folded note had been tucked into my mailbox. No envelope, just a piece of printer paper with big, angry handwriting scrawled across it. "You are a disgusting person. Whatever you put in your pool could have hurt my children. You will be hearing from the HOA." That was it. No signature, no greeting, just venom on paper. I smiled, slipped it back into the box, and went about my day. I hadn't done anything wrong. The powder wasn't toxic. It was literally sold at a pool supply store as a novelty chemical for testing sanitation. If anything, I had performed a public service, one that exposed just how disrespectful they'd been. But still, I braced myself. By Monday afternoon, the HOA email arrived. A formal complaint had been filed by a concerned resident claiming that I had used hazardous chemicals in my pool that endangered neighborhood children. They wanted to schedule a compliance review, code for a scolding session. It was almost funny. Karen, the self-appointed HOA watchdog, had turned to the very system she abused to try to punish me. At the meeting, I came prepared. I brought documentation, product details, safety data, even a printed receipt. The committee was polite but uneasy, clearly caught between wanting to appease Karen and recognizing that I hadn't broken any rule. When I calmly explained that someone had been trespassing repeatedly on my property, they suddenly found themselves quiet. One of the members, a retired lawyer, cleared his throat and said, "Well, that does change the context somewhat." Karen wasn't present at the meeting, apparently too embarrassed to face me, but I knew she'd hear about it. That evening, I came home to find her standing at the edge of her driveway, arms crossed, glaring as I parked. Her lips moved like she wanted to say something, But she didn't. She just turned sharply and went inside. For a while, things were blissfully peaceful. No more unauthorized pool parties. No more footprints, rappers, or music echoing through my yard. Weeks passed, and the air cooled as summer began to fade. I almost started to forget the whole thing. Until one morning, I found something new waiting for me. A fine sprinkling of sand on my driveway. At first, I thought it was just wind-blown dust, but then I saw the faint glimmer of something mixed in. Tiny shards of glass, glinting under the sunlight. Someone had deliberately scattered them there, right near my car tires. The message was clear. Karen wasn't done. That night, I rechecked my cameras and added 2 more. One facing the street, another overlooking the side yard. I wasn't about to let her escalate this quietly. The next morning, I woke up to a new email notification. A notice from the HOA about a potential noise violation at my property. The supposed complaint? Loud mechanical sounds after midnight. She was trying to retaliate. But what she didn't know was that the cameras had already caught her walking past my driveway the night before. Right before the glass had appeared. And with that, a new kind of plan started forming in my mind. If she wanted to play dirty, she was about to find out what that really meant. Because the powder, that had just been the beginning. The thing about suburban warfare is that it never looks like warfare from the outside. It looks like morning jogs and freshly painted shutters, like polite nods at the mailbox and manicured hedges trimmed just a little too perfectly. But underneath, all that civility, it's a chess game, slow, subtle, and vicious. After the powder incident, I thought I'd won. The neighborhood had gone quiet again, and for a while, I enjoyed the illusion of peace. But that sprinkle of glass on my driveway shattered it completely. That was Karen's calling card, vindictive, petty, and disguised as coincidence. I spent the next few days carefully sweeping every inch of my property, eyes scanning for the next little accident. Every morning, something new would appear. A tipped-over trash can, tire marks across the edge of my lawn, a trail of leaves pushed deliberately against my gate. They were small, insignificant on their own, but together they painted a clear picture. She was pushing back. The neighborhood pretended not to notice. No one ever said a word, but I could feel their eyes. Curtains shifted when I backed out of my driveway. Conversations stopped when I walked by. Word spreads fast in neighborhoods like ours, but truth spreads slow, and I knew the story being told wasn't mine. Karen had probably painted herself as the victim. The mother whose children were chemically attacked by a paranoid neighbor. It didn't matter that they'd trespassed over and over again. What mattered was that she had the social power, the network, and that sweet, performative innocence she wore like perfume. But I wasn't going to play defense anymore. I started by upgrading my security system. The old cameras were fine, but now I wanted everything covered. Driveway, pool, backyard, even the front porch. I installed a new set with night vision and motion alerts. Every time someone came within 20 feet of the property line, I'd know. Then, I began documenting everything. Every piece of trash that appeared on my lawn, every suspicious noise, every anonymous note or HOA warning. I started a file on my computer labeled Karen Incidents, complete with timestamps and photos. It was tedious, obsessive even, but necessary. Because the thing about people like Karen is, they're masters of denial. They gaslight, manipulate, twist narratives until everyone starts doubting themselves. The only way to fight that kind of control was with proof, cold, undeniable proof. The next weekend, the proof arrived. At exactly 11:47 p.m., my motion alert pinged. I opened the camera feed and froze. There she was, Karen, creeping along the edge of my yard in her robe, clutching a plastic bag. She looked around once, twice, then tossed the bag over my fence before hurrying back toward her house. The next morning, I found the bag near the pool pump. It reeked, old food, spoiled meat, something half-rotten and sticky. She'd thrown garbage onto my property, and that was when the idea hit me. It wasn't enough to catch her. I needed to expose her. The same way she loved exposing everyone else in the neighborhood for the smallest infractions, I'd let her bask in her own spotlight. That afternoon, I printed several stills from the footage. Her face clear, her arm mid-swing, the garbage bag in motion. I didn't say a word to her. I didn't even confront her directly. Instead, I waited for the HOA's next monthly meeting. When the time came, I attended quietly, sitting near the back of the room. Karen, of course, was front and center, clipboard in hand, chatting with the board members like she was running for office. The meeting was supposed to be about landscaping guidelines, but midway through, I raised my hand. Calmly, I asked the chair if I could address an ongoing property issue. They agreed. I stood, unfolded the printed photos, and laid them on the table. A collective murmur rippled through the room. Even the board members leaned closer. There she was, in clear, full color, sneaking across my lawn under the glow of a motion light. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply stated the facts: repeated trespassing, vandalism, and evidence of retaliatory behavior. Then I mentioned the earlier incidents, the glass, the trash, the false complaints. For the first time since I'd moved into the neighborhood, Karen didn't speak. Her jaw tightened, her face drained of color. The rest of the meeting passed in uncomfortable silence. The following morning, a new HOA email went out to all residents, reminding them that unauthorized entry or tampering with another member's property will result in disciplinary action. It didn't name names, but everyone knew. From that day on, Karen avoided me completely. No waves, no smug smiles, no faux friendliness. She crossed the street whenever she saw me coming. Her family stopped walking past my house altogether. But peace is fragile, and victory never sits quietly. A few nights later, I woke to the faint sound of sloshing. It was soft, rhythmic, like someone pouring water. I grabbed my phone, opened the camera feed, and froze again. Karen's husband. He was in my backyard. He was holding a small container and dumping something into my pool. By the time I reached the back door, he was gone. The gate creaked shut in the distance. The next morning, the water was murky, clouded with a strange, oily sheen. I ran a quick test, and my stomach twisted. He'd poured some kind of household cleaner or detergent into the pool. The chemical balance was completely off. The pH had spiked, and the filter system was clogged. The repairs cost nearly $1,000. That was when I stopped thinking of this as a feud and started thinking of it as a campaign. I wasn't going to keep reacting. I needed to finish this once and for all. So I went back to the footage. I gathered everything: the videos, the timestamps, the receipts, the damage reports. Then I compiled it all into a single file. And finally, I submitted it. Not to the HOA, not to Karen, to the police. Trespassing, vandalism, and property damage, each with documented proof. The report was quiet, methodical, emotionless. I didn't ask for an arrest. I just wanted the record on file. A warning, a paper trail. Within days, an officer visited the neighborhood. He spoke with me first, then walked down the street to Karen's house. I watched from my porch as she answered the door, confusion twisting into panic. That evening, she came storming into the HOA group chat, accusing me of harassment and slander. But by then, no one was listening. The board had seen the footage. The neighbors had seen her behavior. The image of her sneaking through the dark had done the damage for me. For the first time, the queen of the HOA was losing her crown. Still, something in her eyes that night, the wild, furious glare she shot at me as the police car pulled away, told me this wasn't over. And I was right, because 3 days later, I found something else waiting on my porch. A package. No return address. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a handful of bright blue powder. The package sat on my porch like a threat dressed as a gift. A small, plain cardboard box. No address label, no stamp, no handwriting. Just my name printed neatly on a sticker, like it had been hand-delivered. Inside, the blue powder looked harmless, the same powder I had used weeks before. The same harmless chemical that had turned Karen's little pool party into a neighborhood spectacle. But this time, its meaning was different. It wasn't a prank. It was a message. She wanted me to know she wasn't finished. I stood there for a long moment, the powder gleaming faintly in the sunlight, my thoughts racing. There was no proof she'd left it. No camera caught the delivery, no footprints on the porch. But it didn't need to be said. This was her way of reminding me that the game was still on. I sealed the powder back in the box and stored it on a high shelf in the garage. I wasn't afraid of her, not really, but I'd learned enough about Karen to know she thrived on reaction. The less she saw me flinch, the more it would frustrate her. For a few days, nothing happened. The neighborhood hummed with its usual routine: sprinklers at dawn, kids biking after school, the distant whine of leaf blowers. I kept to myself, focused on work, and ignored the sideways glances I got from a few of the more gossip-prone residents. Then came the letter. This one wasn't shoved into my mailbox or printed on cheap paper. It was official, HOA letterhead, stamped, signed, and sealed. The subject line made my stomach tighten. Notice of fine for repeated violations. Inside, the accusations were absurd. Alleged noise complaints, improper fencing, unauthorized camera placement, even disruption of neighborhood harmony. Each line was pure fiction, wrapped in bureaucratic phrasing that screamed of Karen's influence. It was the perfect move. She couldn't retaliate directly anymore, not after the police visit, but she could weaponize the rules, twist them into spears. The HOA board, still half under her spell, had gone along with it. The fines totaled over $800. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the paper, and felt a quiet anger settle in my chest. This wasn't just annoyance anymore. It was a campaign of control, an attempt to bleed me dry through manipulation and technicalities. But she'd made a mistake. I knew the rules better than she did now. After weeks of reading through the HOA bylaws, I'd practically memorized them. And if she wanted to play by the book, I could play better. I started with documentation. Again, every noise level reading, every fence measurement, every security camera angle recorded and dated. Then I gathered the previous police report, the vandalism photos, and the meeting minutes from when she'd been exposed. Next, I filed an appeal. Not a simple complaint, but a formal challenge backed by evidence. And at the end, I added a note, polite, measured, and devastatingly precise. I request that this fine be reviewed by an external HOA compliance officer due to a conflict of interest involving one of the board members. That was the trigger. Karen's power had always depended on fear, people, letting her control the narrative, letting her bully them in silence. But once her influence was questioned on record, she lost her armor. The HOA board couldn't ignore it. An external review meant oversight, transparency, accountability, all the things she hated most. The following week, the external officer arrived. A quiet, neutral woman from another district, clipboard in hand. She spent 2 days reviewing everything, interviewing neighbors, checking footage, reading logs. I didn't try to sway her. I just presented the facts. By the third day, she had her conclusion. All fines against me were voided. And more importantly, a separate investigation was opened regarding Karen's conduct as a board volunteer. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, I saw Karen pacing her driveway, phone pressed to her ear, voice sharp and frantic. The calm mask was gone. Her face was red, her gestures wild. I didn't need to hear the words to know what was happening. The power she'd clung to for years, the false authority, the illusion of control, was unraveling. Within a week, the neighborhood group chat went silent. The usual HOA reminders stopped coming. Then, one morning, an email appeared in everyone's inbox. Effective immediately, Karen W. has been removed from the HOA Volunteer Committee due to Code of Conduct violations. No one needed to ask what those were. I thought that would be the end of it. That finally, she'd retreat, humiliated and beaten. But people like Karen don't fade quietly. They don't accept defeat. They metastasize it. The next sign came 2 nights later. A smell, faint, acrid, chemical. When I stepped outside, I saw smoke curling up from the corner of my backyard. The trash bin, smoldering, half-melted. Someone had dumped something flammable inside. Luckily, it hadn't spread far. The fire department arrived quickly, and the damage was contained to a few scorched patches of grass. But standing there in the aftermath, watching the fire crew douse the last embers, I felt something cold and certain. This was no longer petty HOA drama. This was obsession. I showed the officer the security footage, grainy night vision, but enough to see a dark figure slipping past the fence again. No face this time, but the outline was familiar. The posture, the build. The officer nodded slowly, eyes tired. "File another report," he said. "You've got a pattern now. If it escalates again, we'll take it further." And escalate it did. The following morning, I woke to find my pool filled not with water, but leaves, mountains of them, thick and wet, like someone had raked the entire neighborhood into it overnight. My deck furniture was overturned, one cushion slashed open. The air smelled faintly of gasoline. Neighbors began whispering, not just about her anymore, but about both of us. To them, this had become a spectacle. 2 houses locked in a silent suburban feud, each incident feeding the gossip mill. But I didn't care what they thought. I cared about ending it. And so, I decided to take one final step. The cameras caught everything. The trespassing, the garbage, the vandalism, the fire. I compiled it all again. But this time I didn't just send it to the police. I sent it to the insurance company, to the HOA's legal department, and to every board member who had ever sided with her. By the end of the week, an unmarked vehicle parked across from her house. An investigator. For the first time since this nightmare began, Karen stayed indoors. Curtains drawn, lights off. The woman who used to patrol the sidewalks now hid behind them. The quiet that followed was almost eerie. No more glass. No more notes. No more late-night footsteps or chemical smells. The air felt lighter, but the tension lingered beneath it. A storm that had spent itself, leaving behind only stillness. Then, one morning, as I stepped outside to collect the mail, I noticed something. Her house. The "For Sale" sign planted firmly in the yard. And beneath it, a smaller one, under contract. After all her bluster, her control, her endless need to dominate, she was leaving. I should have felt triumphant, relieved, vindicated. But as I stood there, watching the empty windows of her house, I felt something else, something quieter, heavier. The realization that peace doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it just feels like silence after too much noise. Still, Silence was enough. I walked back to my house, past the pool that now shimmered clean again, past the gate I always locked. The sun was rising, washing the neighborhood in gold, and for the first time in months, the world felt still. But as I reached my door, I noticed one last thing, tucked under the doormat, half hidden from view, a scrap of paper. No words this time, just a smear of faint blue dust. The smear of blue dust sat under my doormat, like a whisper that refused to die. It wasn't much, just a faint streak, too deliberate to be an accident, too familiar to ignore. The color was unmistakable, that same pale, powdery hue that had started everything. I stared at it for a long time, the early morning light catching on the fine grains. I didn't touch it. I didn't sweep it away. I just watched as the wind stirred it into tiny eddies, scattering it across the concrete. Karen's house was quiet. The for sale sign was still there, a thin ribbon of tape fluttering from its corner. The blinds were drawn, and her car sat unmoved in the driveway. But even through the stillness, I could feel it, her presence, clinging to the neighborhood like humidity before a storm. I told myself it didn't matter. She was leaving. Whatever this was, it was her last attempt to get under my skin. One last little jab before she packed up her delusions of authority and carried them somewhere else. But still, the unease lingered. That day passed quietly. I worked from home, trying to lose myself in spreadsheets and emails, but every sound, the creak of the house, the bark of a distant dog, the rattle of the mail slot, pulled my attention back outside. I found myself glancing at the security feeds every hour, half expecting to see her face again in the grainy night vision. By dusk, I decided to do one last sweep of the property, just to be sure. The pool shimmered faintly in the fading light, the water calm and glassy. The air smelled of chlorine and wet leaves, that sharp, clean scent that always followed maintenance. I walked the perimeter, checking the gate, the filter, the cameras. Everything was as it should be. For the first time in months, the property felt safe again. When I returned to the house, I caught a glimpse of movement in the reflection of the glass door. A flicker, quick and deliberate, just at the edge of the fence line. I turned sharply, but by then it was gone. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just seeing ghosts where none existed. But that flicker replayed in my mind long after the sun went down. The next morning, I woke to a noise I hadn't heard in weeks. Water splashing. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone and opened the live feed from the backyard camera. For a split second, all I saw was the pale shimmer of the water under the rising sun. Then, movement. A figure, waist deep in the pool. Karen. Her hair was unkempt, her robe clinging to her shoulders, her eyes wild with something between fury and desperation. She wasn't swimming. She was pacing through the water, her hands trailing ripples across the surface. I rushed outside, heart pounding. By the time I reached the gate, she had climbed out. Her robe clung to her, dripping, and she stood at the edge of the pool like a specter. Silent, trembling, glaring. I didn't speak, neither did she. She turned slowly, walked to the gate, and let herself out. No yelling, no threats, no smug remarks. Just a strange, hollow calm. After she left, I noticed the smell. It wasn't chlorine. It was something else. Sharp, chemical, sour. I leaned closer to the pool and saw faint swirls in the water, almost oily, reflecting rainbow streaks under the sunlight. My pulse quickened. I grabbed the skimmer, dipped it in, and pulled up a thin film that coated the net in slick residue. She had poured something in. Again. That was the final line. I shut down the filter system immediately and called the police. By the time they arrived, the surface of the pool had started to foam faintly. The officers took one look, then cordoned off the area. The hazmat team followed a few hours later. Tests showed the residue was from household cleaners, ammonia and bleach. Combined, they could produce toxic fumes. Had the wind shifted differently, had I gone outside sooner, I might have breathed it in. That thought chilled me. The officers were quiet as they took my statement. They didn't need convincing anymore. This wasn't neighborhood drama. It was harassment, trespassing, vandalism, and now attempted harm. They promised to handle it formally this time. By the next day, her house was empty. No moving truck. No goodbye, just gone. The under contract sign had been replaced with sold, and by evening, the windows were dark, hollow, expressionless. The neighborhood buzzed with rumor, but no one knew where she'd gone. Some said she'd been served a restraining order and moved out overnight. Others whispered about financial trouble, about her husband leaving before dawn. I didn't ask. I didn't care. For weeks afterward, the silence returned. Real silence this time. The kind that feels clean. I replaced the pool water entirely, scrubbed every surface, recalibrated the filters, and had the gate reinforced with a coated lock. I even spread a little of the blue powder across the shallow end, symbolically this time. A quiet ritual of closure. The days blended back into normalcy. Work, yard work, evening walks. The neighbors started waving again. The HOA emails resumed, dry and procedural, now free of Karen's tone. Life was ordinary, peaceful, predictable. Until one night, near the end of summer, when I walked outside and saw something glinting at the bottom of the pool. Just a small object, resting near the drain. I fished it out with the skimmer, heart steady but wary. It was a keychain, cheap plastic, shaped like a seashell, with faded letters across the front. Property of the HOA. I turned it over in my hand, watching the water drip from its edges, the faintest trace of blue still clinging to the metal ring. For a moment, I just stood there in the quiet, the cicadas droning in the distance, the pool lights flickering softly. Then I tossed the keychain into the trash, locked the gate, and went back inside. I didn't check the cameras that night. Some things, I decided, were better left unwatched.